Okay, we are recording now. So, the tablets. You know, they say the one time Moses came to God and said, God, I have a headache. God says, take 2 tablets and see me in the morning. So, in all seriousness, one of the most perplexed stories in the entire Torah is the story of the breaking of the tablets. So in order to get to that part of the story, we have to start with the revelation at Mount Sinai. I'm going to mute everybody as we've done in the past. I'm going to share my screen. Every once in a while, I'll stop for questions. If anybody has any questions, you could always write it in the chat. If it's something that you don't understand, you could unmute yourself and ask. If it's something that can wait till after the class, then you could do that as well. Like we take questions after class. Anybody could feel free to ask anything you want. Okay, I will share my screen now. There. Go. Okay, we are on. Okay, the broken tablets. I forgot to mute everybody. Okay, we'll do it soon. So the broken tablets. So we're going to go through. First, we have to go through the giving of the Torah at Sinai, then the golden calf and the breaking of the first tablets, and then we're going to talk about the granting atonement and giving the second tablets. So I'm gonna hold on one second. I'm just gonna let a few people in that are coming in now. We'll just let them in, and then I'm gonna mute everybody and we'll go to the video. I'll just let everybody in, and then I will start the video, which again will go through that part of the story.
Everything they said today, I want to just amplify what Dr. Redfield said, which is the next few months here.
In the 3rd month of the children of Israel's exodus from the land of Egypt, on this day they arrived in the Sinai desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. Moses ascended to God, and God called to him from the mountain to say, "So shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to Egypt. I carried you on the wings of eagles and brought you to me. And now, if you will listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my own treasure from among all peoples. You will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Moses came and called the elders of Israel, and he placed before them all these words. And all the people replied in unison, and they said, "All that God has spoken, we will do." It was on the 3rd day, when it was morning, there were thunder and lightning and a thick cloud upon the mountain and the sound of the shofar, exceedingly strong. Moses brought the people out from the camp toward God, and they stood beneath the mountain. God descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. God spoke all these words to say, "I am God, your God, who took you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery. Do not have any other gods before me. Do not make for yourselves a graven form or an image of anything in the heaven above or on the earth below. Do not bow to them and do not serve them. Do not take the name of God your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. Honor your father and your mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your fellow. Do not covet anything that is your fellow's. And all the people saw the sounds and the torches, and the sound of the shofar, and the smoking mountain. And the people saw and trembled, and they stood from afar. And to Moses he said, "Come up to God." Moses entered within the cloud, and he ascended the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave to Moses the 2 tablets of the testament, tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God.
Okay, that's part 1 of the story. The giving of the Torah, as you saw in depth, obviously not everything from the whole parsha written, but from what we need to understand for our class. So just quickly, any questions on this part of the story? I'm not expecting many big questions. This is straightforward. This is just the story. But if there's any questions, feel free, unmute yourself before I share the screen, before we keep on going. Okay, so we would probably have to say that this was the giving of the Torah, probably the greatest event that ever happened in human history. If you would have to say what was the most life-changing event in human history, you would probably say the giving of the Torah. The Jewish people got the Torah, and not only did the Jewish people become for a nation then, but as we finished a course last year, Judaism's gifts to the world, we had a 6-week course, and we spoke about what Judaism, what Torah brought to the world. And we spoke about the sanctity of life, freedom of choice, morality, equality, social justice, charity, quest for world peace, so on and so forth. All come from Judaism. We spoke a lot about how many times the courts quote Talmud and so on and so forth. But Judaism brought morality, law, code of law, and moral law, social justice to the world. Without the giving of the Torah, who knows what the world would look like today. Judaism changed the world. And giving of the Torah, divine revelation, it only happened once. God shows up on a mountain in front of about 3 million people, all witness God giving the Torah, life-changing event. That's basically most of us could agree on. So now that we have that, let's go to text number 2. Text number 2, again, we're going to go around, just going around again by faces that I see on the screen as we go around the horn. Brett, text number 2.
Ask now after the early days that came before you, from the day that God created man upon the earth, and from one that end of the heavens to the other. Has there ever been the likes of this great thing, or has anything like it been heard? Has people heard the voice of God speaking from within the fire as you heard him live? You were made to see, to know that God is a God, there is none else beside him.
So, there had never been a time where people witnessed God and lived. There was never such a great event in the world as there was at Mount Sinai. And Moses let the Jewish people know this fact, and it's important for us to know. More than that, it's important for us to tell this to our children, that they should know the foundation of Judaism is different than any other religion. There's a famous book called the Kuzari, written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, and it's basically written as a dialogue between a Jewish sage and there was a king called the King of the Khazars. The Khazars today, they're set, if you would talk about where it's geographically located, is southeast Russia. It was being the 7th and 12th century. They were a big kingdom, a powerful kingdom, and the king of Khazar had many questions, and he challenged a Jewish sage. At the end, the king converted, and this Khazaria, so to say, kingdom became a safe haven for Jewish people. And this was all recorded in a famous book called the Kuzari. And part of it, they discuss how Judaism is different than every other religion. Let's see this text number 3. Carol, Cantor. Text 3. Carol, you gotta unmute yourself. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Moses, the first Jewish leader, was not like them, the founders of other religions. He brought the entire people to stand at Mount Sinai for them to see with their own eyes, each in accordance with their ability and the revelation that he saw. As the verse states, they saw God of Israel. They all could affirm to each other what they saw and heard. This removed from the heart of the nation the terrible suspicion. Perhaps all of this is just the claim of a few individuals that prophecy came to them. For it is not possible to create a conspiracy in full sight of the masses.
So the Kuzari makes the claim over here that Judaism is different than every other religion. Every other religion is just somebody came and said that they had a vision. They witnessed, they had a vision, they saw something, and so on and so forth. God spoke to them and they came to everybody else. Judaism is the only religion to make the claim that God spoke to the masses, everybody equally. 3 million people witnessed it, all the same. They saw it, they heard it, everybody the same. And that's a tradition that's passed from one generation to the next. And Moses lets them know that. He says, why should you believe the Torah? Because you saw this. You saw it. Nobody else, nobody told you. You witnessed it and saw it yourself. And that's the claim that Judaism has that no other religion has. Let me put the screen back up. Let's put the screen back up. Okay, so it was the single most impactful event was the giving of the Torah. The uniqueness of Sinai was the public event, and it was directly experienced. Everybody saw this event. It was seen by all. There was not that one person saw it less than anyone else or more than anybody else. It was seen by all. 1 second.
And heard.
And heard, yes. I'm sorry. I realized I didn't share my screen properly. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. Here we go. There we go. Sorry. Let me go back again. I thought I shared my screen. Listen, with Zoom and yeah. Okay, let's keep on going. Okay, here we go. So, like we said, it was the single most impactful event that ever happened.
Touch the rabbi's picture.
No, I want to see that.
Just gonna mute everybody. Okay. Okay, it was a public event. And everybody directly experienced this event. Now, what's the advantage of having such an event? Why did God need this in such a way? What's the advantage of seeing this event? And when we talk about when you see something, right? So I want to throw a question out there. And you don't need to answer this question, but just think about this moment. What's better, seeing a movie or reading a book? Just ponder on that. Now, when
Reading a book.
Good, we're going to have advantages and disadvantages both ways. Awesome. Now, when somebody comes and tells you something, there might be doubt. There might be doubt in it. But when you see it, you have no doubt. So it says you were made see to know. And they said, if you say, it says, the verse says, if you go back in text number 2, it says, you were made to see to know. And it says, what does it say? That they saw. When you see, firsthand experience, it's more convincing. It's physically real. When you're hearing, you sort of say, sorry, you understand it. If I come to you outside, and if I come to you and you're in a closed room with no windows, and I tell you that it's raining outside, okay, maybe I'm playing a prank on you. I don't know. Who knows? You don't know for certain that it is raining. But if you walk outside and you see the rain, then you know that it is raining. So there's a famous expression that says, seeing is believing. When you see something, you believe it, it becomes part of you. But it's something very interesting when we talk about over here when the Jewish people saw, and this is a mystical idea over here, where text number 4, I'll just read this, a one-liner. It says that when the Jewish people saw, it says they saw the sounds and the torches. It says they saw the sounds. So it's interesting. Rabbi Akiva says in the Talmud, he says in the Mechilta he brings, they saw what is heard and they heard what is seen. So it's interesting. They saw what is heard and they heard what is seen. What's the idea of this? What's the idea of why did God make such a miracle? That means they saw what was normally heard. That means they saw the sounds. They saw the sounds. What was normally seen, they saw the sounds and they heard the voice. I mean, what you would normally see, they saw. What you would normally see, they heard. What you would normally hear, they saw. What was the idea of this? It's a very interesting discussion. As a beautiful text the Rebbe has in text number 5, Robin, text number 5. Yeah, Robin, got to unmute yourself.
Unmute. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This is what the giving of the Torah achieved, that they saw what is heard and they heard what is seen. That which is ordinarily heard, spirituality and godliness, which can also be perceived through hearing, the people of Israel perceived with the certainty and tangibility of sight. They saw godliness. On the other hand, material things which are ordinarily seen, they now heard. The materiality of the world was like something that is perceived by hearing or by logical deduction.
So, what does Rebbe say? What does this mean? That when they were at Mount Sinai, they saw godliness. Right now, for us, spirituality is something that we hear about. It's not something that we see. I could go outside, I could see a tree. I could see you, I could see my table. Spirituality, godliness is something that we normally perceive. We have to understand. The material world, steak, ice cream, that we see, that we feel, so on and so forth. So the Jewish people on Mount Sinai were on such a level that they saw what is normally heard. That means they were able to experience godliness was real. They had a real experience of godliness. And the material world, well, is normally seen, they didn't care about the material world. The material world became irrelevant. That was like heard. That was something in the distant. That was something that wasn't, they didn't so much care about it. They weren't excited about it. They weren't enthusiastic at it. It wasn't all that convincing. They were more into godliness. And that is revelation at Sinai. It made it real. That's when we said the verse, you were made to see. What does it mean you were made to see? Judaism, God became real. They saw it, they experienced it, and that was real to them. So now, once we understand what the effect was of Mount Sinai, what type of effect Mount Sinai had on the Jewish people, now we go to the next text, and I'm going to put up the video again. And this is the story of the golden calf. You hear?
people saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, and the people massed upon Aaron, and they said to him, "Arise, make us a god who will go before us. For this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Remove the golden rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." He took them from their hand, and he formed it with a graving tool, and he made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." They arose early in the morrow, and they offered up burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings. The people sat down to eat and to drink, and they got up to make merry. Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the testament were in his hand. The tablets were the handiwork of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And it was when he drew closer to the camp and he saw the calf and the dances, Moses' anger was kindled, and he threw the tablets from his hands, and he broke them beneath the mountain.
Okay. That's the story. Moses breaking the tablets. You got it firsthand. So, before we ask the big question, but I'm going to stop to share a second. And let's go around. Anybody have any questions on this story?
Like everyone says, how could it possibly be?
How could it happen? Okay, that's the biggie. Any other story? Any other questions?
Especially from Aaron, why Aaron especially would be like the one you wouldn't think would have instigated this.
Okay, we're not going to discuss Aaron tonight, but just to answer your question in short, Aaron didn't instigate it. Aaron was trying to stall for time. They came to him. If you read the story, it says they came to him and they said, you know, let's make a god and so on and so forth. And Aaron was trying to stall for time. He said, bring your gold, bring your this, so on and so forth. And he was just trying to stall for time. And the reason that this happened, again, just on a, what say they were waiting for Moses, is that Moses told him it's going to be 40 days and 40 nights. And they started counting. Day one was the day that Moses went up, was when they started counting. But when Moses said 40 days and 40 nights, as we know in Judaism, the night comes before the day, like Shabbos, Friday night, then Shabbos day, the holidays start at night. So Moses meant the 40 days start tonight. So the day he went up was considered day 0. So basically they were off by one day. And we know that Satan made this image in the sky that Moses is dead, so on and so forth. And the Jewish people basically, they ganged up on Aaron. They said, okay, we need a new God. That's the story. You know, the way the Torah tells the story, that they came to Aaron, and Aaron just tried to give them gold to stall for time, yada, yada, yada. But Aaron was punished. That means the Torah doesn't give him the full blame of it, but the commentaries say the reason later in the Torah that 2 of his children passed away on the dedication of the Mishkan was because of this. So the sages do tell us that that was, so to say, an indirect punishment to Aaron years later.
Rabbi, I have 2 questions. The
Yeah.
first one is why, what is the thought process or the rationale that he broke the tablets beneath the mountain, not at the bottom, but beneath?
Well, so I'm going to talk a little later about beneath the mountain. Hold that thought till the end of till later.
Okay. And the second one is, this is the first time I heard mention of Satan. You mentioned that there was some image that was created.
Yeah, Rashi says that. Again, it's not directly in the Torah, but if you look in Rashi's commentary, that's what Rashi says.
And is there a theological belief that there is a Satan?
Sure, it's in the scriptures. By Yavo HaSatan, it says Satan comes to, I mean, yeah, where do you think the Christians get it from? Yeah, there is an evil. Part of the reason about the code of Jewish law says that we don't blow shofar on the day before Rosh Hashanah is to confuse Satan. There's a whole different things that we do in Jewish law that have to do with that. But again, that's way beyond this class. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, the Satan was created by Hashem with the back side of his thing. So
Yes, yeah. Again, we're not going to get into Satan now, but yes, Satan is a Jewish belief that there is a Satan, which is a bad angel that persecutes against the Jewish people. It's part of our belief. Yes.
okay. Now, regarding the golden calf, it says Aaron molded it. I thought he threw the stuff, they gathered the jewelry, the gold, and he threw it into the fire and the calf came out. He actually molded the calf together? That's different.
Very good question. So it says when he said he molded it, that means he just drew like an image, so to say. But the actual calf that came out was good. I wasn't going to get into now, but you mentioned it. I'll just quote it. Rashi also quotes the Medrash, the famous Medrash that says that when Moses was leaving Egypt and he needed to take out they needed to take Joseph's coffin out. So the Egyptians, when they buried Joseph, they buried him under the Nile, underwater, for real, deep down. And Moses couldn't get him out. And the Talmud quotes as well that Moses stood by the riverbank and he said that, it came the time to leave. You swore to us that we should take you out. We need to take you out. And he wrote on a plaque the words, Alei Shor, let the ox rise. We know when Jacob blessed the children, Joseph's compared to the ox. So he writes, Alei Shor, let the ox rise. And he throws that in the water, and Joseph's coffin rises from the water with this plaque on top of it. One of the Jewish people there, his name was Micha. It's a whole long story in itself. We could do a whole class on Micha, but Micha takes this plaque that says, let the ox rise, which brought up Joseph's coffin, and throws it into the fire, and that causes the golden calf to sort of say come out of the gold. But again, there's a lot to it, and if we start discussing every medrash tonight, we could be talking all night on medrash. Okay, any other questions? Anyone else before we go on to the big question? Okay, so obviously the big question is, and if you want to say one of the greatest mysteries is that if you go back in your textbook and you go back to text 1 on page 143, line 31 to 37, and God says clearly the 10 Commandments, like we said, they saw it, they were impacted by it. This took them. They all witnessed it. Everybody together, they saw. God said, I am your God who took you out of Egypt. And he said, do not have any other gods. Do not make for yourself a form, or so on and so forth. Do not bow down to them and serve them. Hello? 40 days later, give excuses from today till tomorrow. He was a little late. Okay, hey, he was running on Jewish time, as they say. Come on, you want to get cut the guy some slack. So he was a little late. That's why you go and create this golden calf, and you say this is the God that took us out of Egypt. I mean, hello? Are we serious? And it's interesting. I was once listening to last year. I went to hear a speech, and was one of a radio host in America, and I heard a quote, and he said like this. He said, "Why does he believe that Torah is Jewish? Why does he believe that the Torah is real?" He says because he said which other religion would write all these stories in their book if it wasn't written by God and wasn't dictated by God? He says, why would you put these stories in? Just delete them. He says, if the Torah was written by man and you're trying to get people into Judaism, he says, why are you saying the stories like we've been saying all along? Adam and Eve, Noah, the flood, Jacob and Esau. deceiving his father. All these stories, Joseph's brothers, like we spoke last week, selling the brothers to this, to that. You look at this, you think we come from the craziest people in the world. This is our history. He's like, if it was written by men, they did a horrible job. Delete it all. Done. He says the fact that it's all in there, he said, is his proof that it must be not a religious man, but he said he believes 100% in the Torah, and this is why. He says if such a story can make it in the book, it must be real. So you look at such a thing, you read this, and you ask yourself, how does something like this happen? You have to say that this got to be the greatest debacle of all time. If you want to say the greatest, craziest debacle of epic proportion that ever happened, had to be the golden calf 40 days after they all witnessed God. And that is the big question. Again, how does such a thing happen? 1 second, I see I have a question over here in the chat. Did any remains of the tablets found? Good question, Marty. We're gonna talk about that later towards the end of the class. Good question. What happened to the broken tablets? Okay, let's put the screen back up. Okay. Okay, so how did the Jews sin after the greatest revelation at Mount Sinai? That is the question. So now, if you think about the story, what does this story relate to? What is it similar of? And it's interesting, the Talmud makes the comparison between the story of the tablets, first class that we had, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And it's actually interesting because, as we'll see soon, Adam and Eve, we'll soon see the comparisons. But let's see text number 7. Where are we going? Text number 7. Steve, Orlo, text number 7.
Okay. This is the meaning of what is written. I said you are divine, and that supernal beings you are all. Indeed, like Adam, you will die. And the people of Israel waited for Moses and not done that deed. Neither Galut, the exiles of the Jewish people, nor the angel of death would have had any power over them. Thus it is written, quote, the writing was the writing of God, Charut, say Charut, okay, Charut, on the tablets, close quote. What is the meaning of Charut? Cherut, freedom from exile, and Cherut from the angel of death. And the people of Israel proclaim, all that God has spoken, we will do and we will hear. God said, I commanded one mitzvah to Adam for him to fulfill, and I likened him to the ministering angels. This people who will fulfill 630 mitzvot, is it not fitting that they should live and exist forever? But when they proclaimed, this is your God, O Israel, they became mortal. Said God, you followed in the ways of Adam, the first man, who did not hold out for 3 hours, and on the 9th hour of that day, death was decreed upon him. I said you are divine, but because you followed in Adam's path, indeed like Adam, you will die.
So, very interesting. The Medrash says that the word charut, engraved, that means we know the tablets were engraved, comes from the same word in Hebrew as cherut. The letters are the same, just the vowels are different, but they're spelled the same, which means liberation. What does this mean? That God hit a reset button. That means we studied in lesson 1 that Adam and Eve and the original plan, they were meant to live forever. But once they sinned, evil and negativity came into the world and got mixed in good and bad. And therefore they brought death into the world, was part of their punishment. God told Adam, you were dust and to dust you will go. And basically told him that he's gonna die. And when the Jews said, before they accepted the Torah, they said, Nasiv and Ishma, we will accept and we will do the Torah. We're going to accept this Torah. God said, reset button, boom. You know what? Let's go back to the original plan, and everything should be all nice and dandy, and everybody should live forever. No troubles in the world. no plagues, no pain. It says that at the Matan Torah, with the verse we read before, says that all Jewish people saw, everybody heard the voices. What does this mean? Everybody was cured. There was no one blind. There was no one deaf. There was no one lame. There was no, any illness was cured at Mount Sinai. It was a reset button on creation at that moment. And the Jews were gonna live forever. The world, everybody, humanity. It was a reset button. And then all of a sudden they sinned in the golden calf, and God said, okay, that's it, goodbye, forget about this idea again. And they brought death into the world. So if we compare Adam and Eve to this, so they started off, the Garden of Eden is comparable to the first tablets. The golden calf was like the sin of the tree of knowledge. The breaking of the tablets was like the expulsion from Gan Eden. That basically, just like in the first story, they were in the Garden of Eden, was going to be a life of bliss. Then came the tree of knowledge. Then came the expulsion. Same thing over here. With the first tablets, reset on creation, golden calf came, then the breaking of the tablets. So God had restored the people to the original, the way we were, but we screwed it up, basically. And the question becomes why, how do we do such a thing? So on and so forth. But before we answer that question, we have to go and see what happens next. That means the Jews get the second tablets. But we know the second tablets didn't restore to what the first tablets were. As we know, there is death in the world today. As I think was it Jefferson that said, the only certain thing you have is death and taxes. So there is death in the world. So it does exist. Jews, unfortunately, have been persecuted. The world didn't go back to the way it was. So the second tablets seemingly didn't accomplish what the first tablets were supposed to accomplish. So let's see, before we answer the question, let's see the difference between tablets A, first tablets, and tablets B, the second tablets. And here we go to the next reading, text number 8, and I'll put it up on the screen. Okay. Oh, state of perfection, sin, breakdown of, okay. Here we go. Text number 8.
God said to Moses, "Carve yourself 2 stone tablets like the first, and I will write upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke." He carved 2 stone tablets like the first, and Moses rose early in the morning, and he ascended Mount Sinai as God had commanded him, and he took in his hand 2 stone tablets. And he was there with God for 40 days and 40 nights. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments.
Okay, so that's the story of the second tablet.
Who wrote on the second tablets, God or Moses?
Very good. God wrote it, but Moses, so to say, brought them up to God. So Moses had to carve them. That means he carved out 2 stones, brought them up to mountain. And it's a good point that you're asking. Why did Moses need to bring up the stones? You know, what's going on over here? So we're going to address that. That's one of the differences between the first one and the second one. But let's see the difference. What's the difference between the first tablets and the second tablets? So difference number 1, we just said right now, the first one, God, so to say, gave to the Jewish people. He gave them the stones. It was his stones, and he wrote on it. The second tablets, he tells Moses, carve them out. You carve out the stone, bring it up to the mountain, and then God writes on the stone the 10 commandments. Any other differences between the first tablets and the second tablets that come to mind? So let's talk about the Jewish people for a second. The state of the world. When they had the first tablets, we said the world was restored. Boom. They were a state of perfection. The second tablets, so all of a sudden we got now death and struggle, as we said, after the second tablets. That means the second tablets didn't accomplish what the first ones did. The tablets themselves were the handiwork of God. The second tablets were carved by Moses. So these were the differences between the first tablets and the second tablets. But the big difference between the two is where we go. Let's go to text number 9. Where are we next? Harvey Port, text number 9.
Said God to Moses, "Do not be distressed over the first tablets, which contain only the 10 commandments. In the second tablets, I am giving you a halacha, midrash, and agada."
So the Medrash says something perplexed. He says, in the first tablets, you only had the 10 commandments. In the second tablets, I'm giving you also halacha, medrash, and agada, and I will explain this. Len Shapiro, text number 10. This is from the Talmud.
10.
Had Israel not sinned, they would have received only the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. Why? Because as the verse says, much wisdom comes through much grief.
So very interesting. So if we think about this for a moment, basically what are we saying? That the first tablets, another difference, is the written Torah only. The second tablets is the written Torah plus the oral Torah was given with the tablets. So let me explain this for a moment. We have the written Torah, as we know, for those who know what's the written Torah is the 10 commandments, the 600 mitzvos, known as, or we know as the Chumash, the Bible. In every shul, it's known as the Torah. That is the written Torah, is the 5 books of Moses. What's the oral Torah? Is the explanation of the Torah, and that's the interpretation, the explanation of the Torah, and that includes the Talmud, the Midrash, Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, the Zohar, the Kabbalah, the mystical part of Torah. So we have something very interesting over here. The rabbis are telling us like this, that the original tablets that God gave was only going to be the Chumash, was only going to be what we know as the 5 books of Moses. But through second tablets, that means once the first tablets were broken and the second tablets came about, then God gave the whole oral law to Moses. And when we say the oral law means that we did a whole class on this, a full 6-week JLI course on this topic. So I'm not going to do justice to this topic tonight, but just that we could get an understanding of this, the way the Torah is, that means if you take the Torah, it's pretty much just bullet points, not things that we could really comprehend without the oral Torah. For example, I'm just going to throw a couple examples out there, and if you have any questions, we could discuss this after class. For example, the Torah says you should write on your doorposts. We know that means a mezuzah. That means you write on parchment. You know what to write. You put it on the right side of your door, facing in, so on and so forth. And you don't write it on the doorpost. You write it on parchment, and so on and so forth. How do we know that? The Torah just says you should write on your doorpost. How do we know that what to write? How do we know that you write it on parchment? How do we know that you put it on the right side of your door? How do we know that it faces in, so on and so forth? That is all in the oral Torah, passed down from generation to generation in the Talmud. Another example, the Torah says you should bind a knot on your arm and have a totafot sign between your eyes. We know that to be tefillin. How do we know that it's these boxes? How do we know, so on and so forth? And all these laws. The Torah says do not cook a goat in its mother's milk. And we know that that is the basis of the laws of kosher, and so on and so forth. So if you just look at the Torah, it would almost be like you got a manual with bullet points, but the explanation comes later. And without the explanation, we have no clue. How do we know how to read the words? Think for a moment. The vowels, the Torah has no vowels. How do we know how to read the vowels? How do we know where the punctuations are? How do we know where the stops are? How do we know where the verses begin and end? So on and so forth. Basically, it would be impossible to understand the Torah just by looking at the Torah itself. You need the oral Torah to explain, and within that, you have the Talmud, you have the Medrash, you have Kabbalah, many things that we've been discussing in the classes and the interpretations, and so on and so forth, and vast volumes. I mean, today, thousands of volumes have been written of Torah and Jewish law have been written since the Torah was given. So what does the Talmud say? That the first tablets A, was only Torah. Tablets B, second tablets, included the oral Torah as well. You know, they say the famous joke about not being able to understand, the rabbis. So they say there was one time a rabbi that was holding up a big sign that says, the end is near. Turn now from your ways before it's too late. And this guy drives by and says, you religious nut, and goes right off a bridge into the water. And the rabbi says, oy vey, another car in the river. Maybe I should change the sign to say, bridges down, road closed. Anyway, so the Torah, it just gives us bullet points. And seemingly we're saying that that's all we would have had with the first Torah. But the second tablets, we got the Talmud and so on and so forth. So again, like I said, we have addressed this at length in the past. Why is it like this? Why did God choose this method of a written Torah and a oral Torah? In a very, just a basic method, and we're going to get to the mystical explanation as well, is that God wanted that the Torah should be relevant to us today. A Jew lives their life around the Torah. The Torah is the same Torah that's true for a Jew that walked in the desert, for a Jew that lives in Israel, for a Jew that walked in the Rhine in Germany in the 900s, for a Jew that lived in France, for a Jew that lived in Australia, for a Jew that lived through the Spanish Inquisition, and for a Jew that lived in Poland during the Holocaust. The same Torah as we have today in Boynton Beach in 2020. The Torah hasn't changed in 3,300 years, the principles. But Torah gives us different principles that we could adopt the Torah to our day and age. For example, Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud didn't know what a self-cleaning oven was. So how do you know how to kosher an oven? How do we know how to deal with electricity on Shabbos? Again, and we could talk about this for a long time, but the idea is that once God gave us principles, the idea is that we now could take those principles as the Torah lives through every generation. Every generation, once we have the principles of the Torah, then we could adopt those principles to those times. So that's why God, so to say, gave the oral Torah, because God wanted that we should be able to apply it for every single generation. That is, if you want to say, what's called just a very basic answer, but we're going to get a lot deeper into that. So what would have happened was, at Mount Sinai, what would have happened if it was only the written Torah? So how would we have known what to do? That means at the end of the day, we need to know how to put on tefillin. So now we look in the code of Jewish law. We need to know how to put up a mezuzah. You need to know how to keep kosher. You need to know how to keep Shabbos. A Jew needs to know what we have to do in our life. How would we know what we do? So if you go back in the Torah, how did the Jews know then when they had questions? For example, just give you one example. There's a few of them in the Torah. The Jews had a question about how are they going to eat manna on Shabbos? And they came to Moses and they said, what are we going to do? And Moses went to God, and God said, on Friday, I'm going to give you a double portion. And that's why we have two challahs, by the way. That's that tradition. Another story in the Torah. There was a few girls that didn't have a father. $5. And they wanted to know how they're going to get an inheritance. And Moses tells them, wait here, let me go to God and I'll find out for you. After Moses dies, the same thing happens with Joshua and the prophets. When the Jews have a question, what happens? Well, we know the written Torah is called Tanakh. There was prophets that, so to say, the Jews had a question. The high priest would have what's called the Urim V'Tumim. It would light up, and they would ask questions. And the prophets or the high priest would answer their questions directly linking to God. That's the way things went. All of a sudden, God says, no, we don't like that plan. We don't like that plan anymore. We got to go through the oral Torah. We got to go through the oral Torah, meaning to say, I'm not going to be involved anymore in direct communication with you. I gave you my communication. I gave you the tools. I gave you everything you need to know. And basically, now the rest is up to you. Here you go with it. Run with it. Here are your principles, and so on and so forth. Now take the Torah and, so to say, go figure it out on your own. That's the principle over here. The difference between what we say the written Torah and the oral Torah, or the difference between the first tablets and the second tablets. Meaning to say, if it would have just been the first tablets, we would have had just the Torah, and any question we needed, we would have had a prophet turn to God and say, what do we do next? But God said, no, boom, that plan is out, and I'm going to give you the oral. The oral Torah means, here is the Torah, here's the bullet points, figure it out. Hence, we have many, many, many books. Just to give you an example, yada, 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 those books all over there and over there, that's only part of them, on and so forth. Many books on Torah and so on and so forth that we have today. The question is why? That means, why did God change to such a method? That means if I had to think about it, it would be much better the other way around. That means, what could be more clear than God telling me, this you do, this you don't do? So why did the Talmud say, it's almost like, oh, you got a better deal now? Because in the second Torah, you got the oral law. That's what we're saying. The Talmud says, if it was the first law, you would have only gotten, that's what we just read before, text number 10. Text number 9, if it was God says, don't feel bad, because the first one, you only had the 10 commandments. The second one, I'm giving you halacha, and so on and so forth. And the Talmud says, with the first law, you would have just had the 5 books. Now, we got the whole Torah. We can fill up libraries now. Wonderful. But it would have been so much easier the other way. It would have been so much better. Life would have been so much easier. Why not direct communication with God? God says this is the law and that's it. So once we understand this, we'll be able to understand how the golden calf happened, why the golden calf happened, and the advantage of the second tablets versus the first tablet. So I'm going to explain that soon. But just before we get to that explanation, I want to stop any questions on what I just said. Yeah, Brett?
But just maybe a little off topic on that. Aaron, it was a golden calf. Is there any symbolism to a calf? Why it wasn't a goat or a duck or something like that? Is there any symbolism there?
Very good. The rabbis tell us that the Jewish people in Egypt, that's what they used to worship. That means they were idolaters in Egypt, a whole story in itself. But the Jews did idolatry in Egypt. So to say, the Talmud says that's what they were used to doing. So to say, they almost went back. The Jews did a reset to like going back to the Egyptian days and did a reset on, okay, default. Let's go back to the way we were as slaves. Kind of, that was the idea. Yeah, Robin.
Okay, the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, was written through God.
Yeah.
Okay, the 5 books. The interpretation was written through God?
No, the interpretation was given by God to Moses and passed down orally.
Oh, the interpretation was given to Moses through God.
Yes,
So all those books, the Talmud.
but many things that he was given weren't just the law, were principles that we could derive things from. God gave him, the Talmud brings that God passed down through Moses, that there are different principles that we use to derive law. There are different types of law. There is the written law, there is the received law, there is derived law. We did a whole course on this.
And God gave
There's
this to Moses.
legislated law,
And God gave this to Moses.
yes, all the
But
key
written-
elements.
But all the books that were written weren't written by God,
No, but they were written based on these principles.
based on the principles. Okay.
Yeah, Sherry.
Does the written Torah versus the oral Torah go back to when we had passive and then active participants from God back at Noah's time? When they were more passive and people just took it as face value, and here
You're
when we have
onto
the oral.
something. You're onto something, but it's that plus a lot more. So hold that
Okay.
thought. And
Okay.
it's yeah. You're on the right track. Yeah, anyone else? Yeah. Joanne, go.
So if they hadn't built the golden calf and Moshe Rabbeinu hadn't broken the first tablets, we would be making sacrifices in the middle of Boynton Beach Boulevard?
Not saying we would be making sacrifices in the middle of Boynton Beach Boulevard.
But we
There's-
wouldn't have the temple to make them.
No. We would have had a temple, so on and so forth. But the communication would have been a total top-down communication. The communication would have been from God to us. It would have just been, this is what you have to do, so on and so forth. There wouldn't have been, as we'll soon explain, there wouldn't have been any of our involvement in the Torah. It would have been just as was then in the times of Moses. The Jews had a question, he asked Moses, Moses goes to God.
Is that what's going to happen when the Mashiach comes?
Very possible, very possible. Mashiach comes,
It's
the
going to
world
go.
will be able to see God again, and the whole idea of free choice and everything like we know it today is going out the window.
So we can ask direct to him.
To Mashiach, 100%. There'll be the prophets again. That's what it says. Everybody's going to be back. Yeah, you won't need me as your rabbi. You'll be able to go to the bigger and better.
But we don't live as Torah Jews, as written Torah Jews. We live as rabbinic or oral Torah
100%.
Jews.
True. And
So
we're
if
going to
we don't
explain.
have the oral Torah and we have to go by the written Torah, which says that everything you do is in the temple, which is the
No.
temple,
So,
not.
so I'm not saying one verse. What I'm saying is that what the Talmud is saying, based on what the Talmud says, based on the Medrash, that God tells Moses, don't worry, don't feel bad, because the second tablets have an advantage because you got the whole oral Torah with it. What does that mean? If we had to understand that, what we're saying is, and again, we're soon going to explain, we didn't explain the advantage yet, but just I want to understand the concept. The concept means that Judaism would have just been a top-down communication from God to us. And if we wouldn't understand something, we would ask a prophet or a Moses or somebody. That's the way Judaism would have been. But God didn't want that Judaism for some reason. And in the second tablets, he changed it. And he said, I'm just going to give you the principles. Moses, here you go. These are the principles. Here is the oral Torah. And this is what you're going to teach down from generation to generation. And it was passed down, and it's still being passed down today from father to child, from teacher to student, and so on and so forth. So that is still happening today through generations, 3,300 years later.
Rabbi,
Gotcha.
question.
Yeah,
Question. But that's that you're pointing out is a positive, but doesn't that also come with the negative of sin, death, and hardship that came with
Ah,
the.
okay. Yeah. 100%. So seemingly this all seems as to be a negative point and so on and so forth. That means the first tablets was everything is great. But
Right.
besides for that, just the clarity, imagine a simple
Right.
clarity living today, that we just have clarity from God what to do and everybody's on the same page. Life would sound like bliss. So why is the oral Torah an advantage? So what God is saying, the content is divine. The content of the oral Torah is divine, but the medium to get there is going to be human. The medium to get this content is going to be the rabbis through generations, pass it down, and God, so to say, wanted this human chain to continue from generation. Okay, so let's now understand this idea. But that's what I'm saying. So let's break down. Let's understand this question. So, the written Torah, divine revelation. Oral Torah, human understanding. Which one is more effective? Seemingly, first tablets is divine revelation. Second is human development. Over here, when we talk about divine revelation, it's clarity. You have it all. So what's the advantage of human development? So here's somebody asked about beneath the mountain, and here's a very interesting quote in the Talmud in text number 11. Hold on one second. What do I see on my screen? What do I see on my screen? Oh, Joanne, go. Text number 11.
This teaches us that God overturned the mountain over them like a cask and said to them, if you accept the Torah, fine. If not, there shall be your burial.
How do you like that one?
Free will.
This goes against almost anything that we know as Jews. That means we just said earlier, if you go back to text number 1, that means if you go back, it says over there, it says they stood under the mountain, but it says that they stood under the mountain, but we also know that they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do. We speak so much. We said earlier in the text that God was so impressed that the Jews said, we'll just do it. What do you mean? That's called we'll just do it? Yeah, you hold a mountain over your head and say, if you accept it, good. If not, this is going to be a burial. We know the famous medrash that says that God went to every nation. Nobody wanted the Torah. The Jewish people accepted the Torah. We said we'll do it, so on and so forth. What's going on over here? It says they stood beneath the mountain. They stood under the mountain, the Talmud says. They were coerced. But how does that go? It says that God spoke to them and they said all that God said, we will do. That sounds pretty willful to me. That sounds like enthusiasm. I'm ready to do it. So what do you mean they were coerced? So the Rebbe has a beautiful explanation into this, and with this explanation, we'll be able to now answer all the questions. Text number 12, Sherry. Next.
How do we reconcile the saying of the sages that God overturned the mountain over them like a cask with the fact that the people willingly responded, we will do what we will and we will hear? The deeper meaning is as follows. When the people of Israel stood at Mount Sinai, only 50 days had elapsed from their exodus from Egypt, which was the most debased place in the world in terms of decadent character, as it is well known. It is not sufficient time for them to make the transition from one extreme to the other and to achieve a genuine recognition of the value of the Torah. Rather, this recognition was forced on them from above when the light of truth was revealed to them so powerfully that they could tangibly see that the Torah and the mitzvot were the ultimate good, and that without them, their lives were not worth living in the most literal sense. They therefore proclaimed with all of their heart and soul, we will do and we will hear. However, because they did not achieve this recognition in a progressive, methodical way by their own efforts, but rather as a gift and a flash of illumination from above, once the moment of revelation had passed, nothing but a faint impression of it remained.
Here says the Rebbe, based on Jewish mysticism, based on Kabbalah. How do we understand this? And this is the key moment of the class right here. This is it. The Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai. They all witnessed God. It was like a mountain on top of them. It was like an amazing experience. It was a miraculous moment. It was wow, 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 wow. They saw God, everything. It was like, how could you say no? How could you not believe at that moment? But then what happened once God left the mountain? And I'll ask you the question. What happens when we get inspired and we say that I'm going to make all these changes, and we hear a great sermon, or we hear a great speech, or we read something exciting, or so on and so forth, and we say, this is it, my life is going to change, and that change lasts until tomorrow morning? What happened?
You face
What happened?
reality.
You didn't only face reality. We did face reality, but what happened? What changed?
You forget, you move on.
You don't forget. What happens? You know, people get married. They sit there, and marriage is the greatest day of your life. They say, I love you, and I'm going to live my rest of my life with you, and you can't see it any other way. And then come a couple years later, and what happened? You stand in Shul on Yom Kippur. You stand in Shul on Yom Kippur. Who's not inspired when they're in Shul on Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, we could have packed 600 people, BC, before COVID. You could have 600 people in Shul on Yom Kippur. And then a week after, scraping for 1 million. What happened? Who's not inspired Yom Kippur? Great. What's the difference? When someone tells you something, when someone tells you something inspirational, and something happened, let's say, God forbid, there was a tragedy in the family. God forbid something bad happened. And you tell this person, I'm going to be there for you. And you hug them and you say, that's it. I'm going to value life now. I just realized how important life is. Tomorrow morning, I'm telling you, that's it. I'm gonna start eating healthy. I'm gonna go to the gym, and I'm gonna do, that's it. God forbid, this is never gonna happen to me. And the next day, the coffee and Danish taste exactly the way it did that day. And the next day, there's no more time for gym anymore, and so on and so forth. And the person that you hugged and said, I'm gonna be for you for the rest of your life, after Shiva, it's nice if you call them once a month, then once a year, and it's good if you wish them a happy new year. What happened?
Easy, go back.
You have a child. You say, I'm never going to leave this child. I love you dearly. Then you can't wait for the kid to go to college and get out of the house. What happens? So the Rebbe is telling us something deep over here. And that is, by Mount Sinai, when something happens to you, that doesn't change you. Something happens when something affects you from the outside, where we say top to bottom, where something happens and affects, it comes top to bottom. They were so overwhelmed by godliness. They said, of course, we'll do. God standing on a mountain says, you want the Torah? Who's going to say no? But what happens 40 days later when the inspiration is gone? They were also human beings. You know what we called a miraculous moment? A miraculous moment is called a miraculous moment because it's just a moment. And the next moment, we forget about it. It's done. So over here, God realized that if it just comes from above, if it just comes from inspiration from above, it ain't gonna work. If it's just imposed, we all know ourselves. If I'm not so excited about something, but I only do it because I was excited once, and then I'm not so excited anymore, then what happens? I feel imposed. How many people actually end up doing some things because they were imposed to do it? We all know. Who wants to be imposed to do something? Nobody. Think about this for a moment. Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is not a holy place. The place that God revealed himself, the place that God came down on a mountain and revealed himself for the greatest revelation of all time. I could go there today and I could put up a grill and have a great barbecue with all of you and put up loud music and have a great time and watch a football game if they had Wi-Fi at Sinai. Mount Sinai, the minute the revelation ended and the cloud ascended, what does the Torah say? Once the cloud ascends, anybody can go up the mountain. During the revelation, God says, anybody touches the mountain, you're dead. During the revelation, anybody touches the mountain is dead. But once the revelation is over, the mountain didn't become holy. Why? Because it was all from above. It was all from God. So God came down, it's holy. God went up, boom, go have a barbecue on Sinai. But the Beis HaMikdash, the temple that we built 2,000 years later, the Western Wall is still the holiest place in the world. Who built it? Not God. We did. When we make a show, it becomes holy. When we write a Torah scroll, it becomes holy. And so on and so forth. When God gave us the oral Torah, he didn't just give us the oral Torah. He said, right now, we're going to have a bottom-up relationship. I want it to be yours as much as mine. What does God tell Moses? Carve the tablets. You bring them up to the mountain. You're going to participate in this. From now on, it's not only me anymore. Yes, I'm going to inspire you. The Torah is still going to be divine. The Talmud is still holy. But you're going to take part in this. You're going to own it. It's going to be your Torah. And that's what the oral Torah did. And that's why we're still here today. Because if it was a top to bottom relationship and just an imposed relationship of God on a mountain, we see what happens. I.e., golden calf. It doesn't last. Because we all know inspiration that comes in is easy come, easy go. Quick inspiration comes, quick inspiration goes. It's there for a moment, and then it is gone. You know the famous old joke? How many Buddhists does it take to change a light bulb? None, because change comes from within. So it's not a Buddha joke, it's a Torah joke. Because Torah is telling us that change comes from within. No one could change you. We all know that. How many times you could preach, you could turn blue and speak to somebody. And what? They'll tell you, yeah, and walk away and nothing. And you know that from someone could turn blue to you and try to get you to change and tell you, and you have to do this and you have to do that and that, yeah. No one could change anyone else but themselves. The only ones that could change us is us. Now, we need the inspiration, as you will see. We need that inspiration to guide us, to keep us, and so on and so forth. We need to have God's, so to say, revelation to kickstart it. But at the end of the day, that's not enough on its own. It can't just be the revelation. We have to be true partners in it. And that was the second tablets. God told the Jewish people, you're my partners in the Torah. Here's the principles. Here's the oral Torah. You guys run with it. Hence, we have today the Medrash, the Talmud, Kabbalah, Code of Jewish Law, and all the commentaries, and Rashi, and Tosfos, and so on and so forth. And you go to Yeshiva and you have books lined up of the oral Torah. And that's why we are still here today as Jewish people, because we owned the Torah. The Torah is ours. God gave us the inspiration. God still gives us the inspiration. It's divine. It's all divine. But we take a part in the Torah. We feel that it's ours. It's our Torah. We have a question today. How do we act? How do we go in a certain way? we go to the Torah, we figure it out. We have to figure out what to do today, how to live as a Jew today, so on and so forth, the questions we have today, and so on and so forth. We have the principles. We have to figure out how to live as a Jew in modern times in 2020. It's not just coming from somebody imposing you and trying to change you. It's us being an active partner in the Torah. So God points us in the right direction. God points us in the right direction. God says, here's the Torah, gives us the inspiration, meaning to say, every marriage, you have that marriage day, but that's just the kickstart. Now you have to work on it. Now you got to work on the marriage. You have a child, you love the child, now you got to work on that relationship. You're in Shul on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you're inspired, now you got to work on it. Everything that we want, we have to work on it. We could have a kickstart. You could have somebody, tell you you're really inspired, but now you have to work on it. Someone could tell you from today till tomorrow how this is healthy and this is good and this is this and this is that, whatever. We have to decide that this is it. I have to make that change. No one can make the change for me. I could be inspired. That's the first tablets. That's the inspiration. We all need the inspiration. You need that moment. We have to have that moment, that grand revelation, that miraculous moment. But we also have to realize that we can't just live our life like that. We can't just live our life waiting for those moments. We have to treasure those moments when we have them, but then ride those moments ourselves through our work. And that is the advantage of what we said before. We said at the beginning of the class, what's the advantage of seeing over hearing? So we say seeing is believing, hearing not always. So divine revelation is temporary inspiration. Human development is personal transformation. And that we say is what's the seeing? So seeing is objective. Hearing becomes subjective. When I hear, all of a sudden it becomes me. I become an active participant in the story. When I'm listening to something, so when I see something, I see. When you see something, when you see something, and then there's a bunch of details, and then you're trying to, so to say, put it together, but you already got your picture of it. When you see it, you got your picture. When you hear it, you kind of create your own picture for it. It's so funny. There was this, when I was a kid, I used to listen to this story tape. It was called The Golden Crown of Adar. It was a great tape. I loved it as a kid. And then I saw my kids now, they were watching the video of it. And I looked at the video and I couldn't look at it. It took away my whole childhood perception of what all the characters looked like. I had my vision of what the guy Borisov looked like, of what the rabbi looked like, of what all the characters looked like. I had my vision of what they were. And then all of a sudden, I saw this. I was like, no, that's not it. It's the wrong story. When you see something, so to say, that it gives you a perspective, but that's not you. That's not you. It just happened to you, but it's not you. You see something. It's a perspective. When you hear it and you listen to the story and so on and so forth, yes, there is doubts and so on and so forth. And yes, there could be much more clarity when you see things. Or when you, like you said, when you read the book, or when you hear a story, so on and so forth, you develop the story. You develop in your mind, you take all the pieces together and you develop the story, and that sticks to you much better. We all know when we study, when somebody teaches, and if you sit there in a class and you listen and you just get it and you hear it many times, you hear something, it goes in one ear and out the other ear. You could ask my wife. You know the famous joke. Sherry, don't laugh too much. They say the famous joke where the wife says, "You're not even listening," and the guy says, "Wow, that's a strange way to start a conversation." Anyway, so when we talk about hearing, versus seeing, yes, seeing has a tremendous advantage. But seeing something is almost like you get something from above, but that's not you. You could hear something, you could hear a class, and it's all great. But when you study it on your own, when you sit down yourself and you put the pieces together and you work yourself on figuring something out, that's staying with you much more. It becomes much more real to you. That becomes you. That becomes your story. It becomes you identify with it more. It becomes part of you, so on and so forth. And that's the advantage of listening. That's the advantage of hearing over seeing. 1 second, just before I get to the next text, and we close this out. What time is it? Okay, we're doing well. 8:52. Okay. Someone had a question. Yeah, Sherry.
I would disagree with using the word objective with seeing, because everything you perceive is still going through your experiences. So it's not quite objective because it's how your brain's interpreting it. So, but passive, yes.
Right, but when you see
active,
something,
yeah.
When you see something, you don't really have much choice in how you go about it. When you hear something, you, so to say, build it up on your own. That's the idea of what you're saying over here. But the general concept of seeing versus hearing is when we talk about top bottom or bottom up.
Yeah.
Top bottom is a great experience, is amazing, it's an inspiration, but it's gone. Bottom up, I work on it, it becomes mine, it's more lasting. It lasts longer. And that's the idea. And again, that's why God wanted us to be a participant in the Torah. Now, someone asked before, Marty asked before, what happened to the broken tablets? So here we have a text number 13. Who didn't read? Who's next? Barry, text number 13.
Both the second tablets and the broken tablets were kept in the ark.
So they took the interesting text, the Talmud says. So they took the tablets and they kept the broken tablets. Question obviously is, what's going on? If these tablets are so bad, well, why would we want to remind God of this story? You know, we know on the it says the first tablets. It's got the first tab. I'm sorry. We know on Yom Kippur, the high priest doesn't come into the Holy of Holies with gold. Why? Anybody know why?
The calf.
Not to remind God of the golden calf. So what do we do? In the ark, we put the first tablets. Tell me that makes sense. That means the high priest doesn't wear gold in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur because we're asking for forgiveness and we don't want to remind God of the golden calf. No, we're not going to wear gold. Therefore, on Yom Kippur, boom, we wear white. Okay, the high priest only wore white when he went into the Holy of Holies. Why? Not to. So, but what? Oh, but in the ark is sitting the broken tablets. You would think to yourself, take these broken tablets, get rid of them in a very far place that nobody should ever know that they exist, but they're there.
How could
in
you?
The ark. They stayed there in the ark. The broken tablets stayed, and the new tablets, because we know the place of the tablets. The Torah tells us to put the tablets in the ark. So the new tablets 2.0 went in the ark, and tablets 1.0, broken tablets, went to the ark. Question is why? Why would we put the broken tablets in the ark? Why would we want that? And the idea is because it teaches us that both ideas are true. I'm going to have two lessons over here. Two lessons that we can each take to our life. Number one is that the broken tablets teach us the message that we need both experiences. Number one, we need the experience of the divine. The broken tablets remind us that God gave us the tablets, that the Torah is from God, and that's the inspiration from above. And we need that inspiration, and we need that to be our driving force. That means we need that inspiration. We have to have that inspiration. If not, we would always remain trapped in our limitations. The inspiration has the power to take us out. The inspiration has the power to give us that boost, to give us that jump start, so on and so forth. But we can't just stay with the jump start. We have to have the second tablets, which is our work, our participation. We have to do the work. At the end of the day, we have to get the job done. It's our job to get it done. That means we have to make it happen. So the first tablets represent the kickstart from God, represents that it's God's divinity that always goes through everything. At the end of the day, the second tablets remind us who we are. That we said. What's the second message is also a very important message. That is that many times in our life, we feel like we're the broken tablets. We feel that we messed up. We feel that that's it. I screwed up. That we feel like the broken tablets. What does God say? The broken tablets remain in the ark, meaning to say, don't throw away the broken tablets. When something negative happens in your life, use that as a springboard for something better and something more positive. Every negative things that happens to us in our life has to bring us to a catalyst of growth. Don't look at the negative things that happen in our life as something that breaks us and we're done. God says, no, the broken tablets stay in the ark because that was part of it. The broken tablets led to the oral Torah, which is the purpose, and the Talmud, and so on and so forth. And God says the same things in our life as well. We have broken tablets, but don't let those broken tablets take you down. Let that be a catalyst of growth. And let those broken tablets, they're still there. They're still there with us. We never forget. We never get rid of the broken tablets, because when something like that happens in our life, when there are broken tablets and we feel like broken tablets, don't break down and say this is done. Forget about that. No, use that as a catalyst for growth. And I could sit here and tell you stories all day, but I'll just tell you, there's a famous line that the Rebbe once said, for Brengen, and he said, there's nothing straighter than a crooked ladder, and there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. Think about that for a second. But we know there are other stories. I just want to tell you this is a famous story of the guy that invented the post notes. We've spoken about this many times, but just to remind you, the guy that invented the post notes, those sticky notes, he was trying to invent glue. Trying, and he failed, and he did. And finally it was like, it wasn't sticking. And then he came up with this idea, maybe there could be an idea of someone that could have glue, but it doesn't stick completely, but just sticks for a little. And that's how the post note was, those little yellow things that you put on your table, your computer, this, that, those post notes. And the guy ended up becoming a multi-millionaire from a failed experience. They say the story with the guy that would walk with 2 buckets of water. And one bucket had a hole in it, a crack, and water would pour. The other bucket was whole. And he would walk every day home with these 2 buckets, and he would feel so bad that the other bucket, by the time he got home was half full, and kept on doing this always, daily. And one day he's sitting there and he's comforting the bucket, and he's telling this bucket, you know what, you also have purpose. You're okay. And he notices that on the sides of the road where he walked, beautiful flowers and grass, all of it was growing. And he's wondering what's going on. And the guy tells him, sir, he says, I see every day you're walking with water and bucket is dripping. He says, I decided to, on this dirt road, to plant. I put seeds down. And every day when you walk home back and forth, he says, when you walk with these buckets with water, he says, every day you water these seeds. The whole way you're watering seeds, and therefore you ended up growing these beautiful plants and so on and so forth, all because of the broken bucket ended up being a catalyst for growth. In our life, I'm sure we each have experiences that we thought were that broken tablets, but at the end came out to be something of growth that we wouldn't have had that. We wouldn't have had it without it. At the end of the day, they say if the challenge doesn't kill you, it's going to make you stronger. And that's the purpose. That's Hashem gives us these broken tablets. Hashem gives us these broken tablets and says, don't let go of them. Keep them there. Cherish them, because those broken tablets are going to be your catalyst for growth. And that's what Hashem tells each and every single one of us. Any questions before we get to the key points?
Yeah, I had a question and okay, at the end of text 12, where we're saying the final, the Rebbe is saying that the first, it wasn't by our own method that we.
Yeah.
But what I thought the Jewish people went in the 49 days before receiving the Torah, they counted the Omer, and they progressed one step, one rung at a time, and they accomplished all 49 of the.
Great question. But at the end of the day, the inspiration that happened at Mount Sinai, that means that was needed 100% to get to that level. They got out of there, so on and so forth. But the inspiration that happened at Sinai, how did it happen?
Oh, was from God alone. It wasn't from them, even though they had progressed.
That means they worked on themselves, but think about it. How long did they work on themselves? 49 days. So they did. They were working on themselves, but think about it. How many times in the desert did they say, let's go back to Egypt?
Every 5 minutes.
Every 5 minutes. That means at the end of the day, when the inspiration just came from above, yes, they worked on themselves a little, and hence, you gotta give them credit for that. But change is not just 40 days. Change is not only 7 weeks, but the point is it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime. That means you need the kickstart. You need God to start it off, to kickstart it, but you can't just rely on inspiration. Many people today, unfortunately, they're just relying, they're waiting for inspiration to happen. They're waiting for the next inspiration. So the inspiration happens, we have to treasure it, but it's a moment. And that moment we have to take and then work on it ourselves. The Jewish people in the deserts, they had everything. They had the manna from heaven. They had this, but it was all coming from above. That's why it didn't last. That's why that generation, they all died out in the desert. That generation, they were doomed. They were done. Everything that came from above, if it all comes just on inspiration, the minute you don't have that inspiration, what happens? You're gone. Or when you work on yourself, when we do it, when we're a participant, when we take an active role, then it becomes ours.
Okay. All right.
Okay, I'll go to the key points. If anybody has any questions afterwards, we'll stay on for any questions and answers. Here is the key points for today's class. Okay, 1 second. First tablets, inspiration from above. Second tablets, change through personal struggle. Broken tablets represent the failures. When you have dejection and despair, forget and move on. Use that as a catalyst for growth. Here are the key points.
Lesson 5, The Broken Tablets. 1. The giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, where the entire people of Israel directly experienced the most unequivocal divine revelation in history, is the foundational event of Judaism. At Sinai, we saw what is heard, and heard what is seen. Godliness and spirituality, which are ordinarily apprehended secondhand or heard, were perceived with the immediacy and veracity of sight, whereas the physical world, which is ordinarily seen, was relegated to a lesser realism of something that is heard and understood. And yet, shortly thereafter, the people violated the first commandments they had heard directly from God by worshiping the golden calf. prompting Moses to break the tablets. How was this possible? 2. At the giving of the Torah, God restored for the people of Israel the state of tranquility and immortality that existed in the Garden of Eden. Worshipping the golden calf was essentially a repeat of Adam and Eve's transgression and resulted in the breakdown of this ideal state. 3. God granted the people the second tablets, but these differed from the first tablets in a number of significant ways. This time, mortality and struggle were not abolished. In the first tablets, both the content and medium were from God, whereas in the second tablets, the content was divine, but the medium was of human manufacture. The first tablets embodied only the written Torah, God's direct instructions to us. The second tablets incorporated also the oral Torah, the process by which we expound the written text and apply it to our lives, making the Torah a partnership of divine revelation and human understanding. 4. Divine revelations and miraculous experiences shake us out of our complacency and set us in the right direction, but they do not truly change us. True and lasting transformation will only come by means of a second tablets process in which we struggle to build a relationship with God. The first tablets were a seeing experience, an overwhelming revelation to which we were the passive recipients. The second tablets are a hearing experience, something that we actively create step by step with our own faculties. 5. We need both sets of tablets, as indicated by the fact that the Ark in the Holy Temple contained both. The first tablets alone cannot create anything lasting in us, but they are the foundation for everything that we achieve. 6. There are two common reactions to the failures we experience in our lives. A. Despair. B. A desire to start from scratch and leave our past behind. The fact that the broken tablets were preserved in the Ark presents us with a third option: to carry these broken pieces with us, connecting with the original passion and overwhelming energies they hold, and making them the foundation for our future achievements.
Okay. Exercise for this week. Try to think of stuff that you would consider broken tablets and or failure, and try to think of how that led to positive growth. We could continue learning, jli.com, myjli.com/Bible. I usually send it out in the weekly email, but you could have the PowerPoints, the videos, continue reading. There's a lot of great stuff. Again, a lot of this is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to discuss. We only got 90 minutes over here. Next week, yes, very sad. I'm enjoying this a lot too. And next week is our last class. And next week's story is going to be the famous story of Korach's rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. And if you talk about a family feud, Moses' first cousin tries to make a coup against Moses. So the first coup in the Torah, where Korach's rebellion tries to take down Moses. And obviously, what was he thinking? Why would you want to start up with the guy that brought down 10 plagues, split the sea, and came down Mount Sinai with tablets twice? Why would you think that you stand a chance to take him down? What was Korach thinking? What's the inner meaning and the deeper meaning of that fascinating story? Be back next week, 7:30 p.m. I'll be sending out an email also with all Hanukkah information. Got a lot of exciting stuff coming up. See you next week. Everybody have a great week. Oh, 1 second. Questions? Any questions? Not all at once. Anybody?
Rabbi, I have a...
Oh, 1 second. I see the chat is on. 1 second. Let me first go to the chat, and then I'll where would he have been without the golden calf instant? So basically, that's what we would be. We would be with just God, so to say, directing us from above. But not with our participation. It would just be kind of
I
God.
was asked a long time ago.
Yeah, God communicating with us. I see. Okay. We make a choice to do it at our will. We have to do it. Yes, we have to internalize it. Very well said. No imagination needed when you see it. When you see it, you see what you get. But at the end of the day, when you see it, it's just kind of decided for you. When you hear it, you kind of, so to say, you build it up. Okay. Any questions?
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I have a question. Going back to the first tablets, when God restored the state of creation, did he do it only for the Jewish people, or did he do it for the world? There were other people beside the Jews in the world, the Egyptians.
Yeah, so it sounds like he
Babylon.
restored, it would be for the whole world.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. We hold a lot of power. That's why a lot of people don't like us.
That is true. Thank you.
Yeah. Emily, your mommy's been waiting for you to ask a good question.
It's not a great question. It's just a thought, really. It seems that every week with every portion that we learn, that the theme is the same, like going from passive to being active, from Adam, instead of God just giving them everything, their punishment was that they had to work to get the things that they had initially. And Noah had to work on the ark to be saved, and Isaac had to, everyone had to work for their blessings or work for whatever it is. So that's like the ongoing theme, I think.
Very
with all
good.
of these.
The ongoing theme is that passive versus active, bottom up instead of top bottom. That means Isaac wanted to give the blessings to Esav in a more top bottom way, but we have to go Jacob is bottom. Yes, what you're saying is correct. That's the general approach of Hasidus, Kabbalah, so on and so forth.
The second thing that occurred to me when we were talking about the tablet being in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, in the
Yeah.
even when he comes in on Yom Kippur and whatever it is, but it's also what I was thinking also is that it's to remind us that there was precedent, that we had made really bad choices, but we were able to be forgiven in the sense that we had a second chance to do it, to try to do better the next time with the second set of tablets. So, even on that, on Kippur, when we're asking for Sicha, and, we're also saying, remember, we didn't do a great thing last time and you forgave us though. And
good point. It reminds us that forgiveness is within reach. It happened once, don't despair.
Right. So I think as part of not just not seeing things fall, but you can be forgiven. Forgiveness is an option to move forward.
Yes. Very nice.
Good job.
Anyone else?
Wasn't a question.
Still a good job.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Len, you got something? Oh, and Audrey also got something. Len, you got to unmute yourself.
Oh my.
No, just saying goodbye, Rabbi. That's
Oh,
it.
you're just saying goodbye. Okay. Audrey, you had a question? No, you're also just saying goodbye.
I'm saying bye.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Sei gesund.
Sei gesund. Have a good week.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a good week. Stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe.
Yeah.
Okay, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yes. Yes.